Hello again and welcome. In this tutorial, volume 3 of our Angular 7 tutorials, I'm going to show you how to create a Java MongoDB backend, a database to be used with an Angular application that we created in volume 1 and volume 2 of our tutorials. So welcome and let's get started. Now to speed up the tutorial, I'm going to be just copying and pasting the code because there's a lot of steps. There's about 30 steps that we're going to go through. And then I'm going to go back to our tutorial 2 and bring up the application, modify it a little bit, and be able to show you how to log in and bring in real data from the database, because in tutorial 1 and 2 we were using, we hard-coded a string that we used to validate for the application. So let's get started. Step number 1, I'm going to generate a Maven project, Maven user project. And to generate that, this is the command that you use. So I'm just going to do MVN, meaning Maven, and then I'll do archetype generate. That's for generating the application. I'll do group ID. I'm going to say just PMK. This is something I do for my applications. You can change this to your own if you wish to. And then I'm going to do D artifact ID. We're going to call application user. Maven archetype web app. Interactive mode false. I don't want it to be asking me, do you want to do this or that? So that's it. So archetype just means that what you're doing, you're generating a project. This is my group ID. So the application is going to have a Java package called pmk app. That's where everything's going to start. And then the artifact ID is user, just meaning that the application that it's going to generate right here is going to be called user. And then artifact ID means that we're going to generate a web application using Maven, and then interactive false, that's what it is. So we're going to create it right here. So that's how to do the creating of the project. Now, as usual, all this code is inside our GitHub website. You can go there, download it for free. So I'm just going to be copying and pasting from the most part, and then I'll put the code up there for you. If you need it, then you can go download it for yourself. Create the application. It takes a little while to bring up this. So the application is created now. So if I do a dir, I'll see a folder called user. I'll do cd user to go to that folder now. So now, as you can see, there's a POM there. And so that's where we get started. Now, one other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy, because, I have to do mvn clean, all these commands like that. So instead of doing that, what I do is I create scripts that can do that. And I'll show you these scripts. So to start with, I'm just gonna copy the scripts and then I'll show you what they're doing. So if I go now to my, where's my Java? So I'm gonna copy everything from this Java from the user over here. I'm just gonna copy these things. Build, enunciate, and I'll explain to you what those are. I won't copy the POM. I'll do the run and the run MongoDB. So these are, copy them all and then I'll explain to you. So we just created this application right here, and I'm going to paste them here, and then I'll open them and explain to you what they are. So basically the build is just for, it has a command mvn clean build. Enunciate, I'll show you once I import the application to IntelliJ. Enunciate, basically what it does is that it creates Swagger UI documents for testing the back end when you don't have the Angular application running in the front end. And I'll show you how that is. The POM is our, our application. So in this POM, I'm going to put in several things and you'll see how that works. So, and then run is just for, so I don't have to type in, Jetty run. We're going to be using Jetty web server. And then run MongoDB. This is for actually creating or populating our database, our MongoDB database. So that's it for now. So having done that, now I can go back in here and I can say that because I have scripts, that's the reason why I use the scripts, and I'll give you these scripts in GitHub so you can use them. I can do now build, and when I do build, it's just going to go do clean package, as you can see, skip tests. So I would have had to type in all that command all through, but now you just have to do build if you're in Windows. If you're in a Unix environment, then you can just use the sh or the the scripts in Unix. So the application has been built. So that's basically how to do that one. I'm going to do import the project now. That's it for now, and then the application comes up, as you can see. There it is. So that is our user application. This is what we're going to be coding this thing. So now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to modify this POM XML file. I'm going to add a lot of things, and I'm going to explain to you as I go along. I'm just going to do so. I'm going to break it into different parts. As you can see, it's got the build, it's got the dependencies, and then it's got the project. So let me make this a little bigger. So instead of snapshot, I don't like to do that. I'll just do just that. Instead of war, I'll do a Java file. And instead of this, I'm going to say, yeah, this is just user Maven web application. I'm going to do my website instead. I'm going to do pmkent.com. That's what it is. So I'm not going to be doing JUnit. So we're going to start now the imports copying. So the first thing I'm going to copy is actually the Java Servlet API. And it's going to look like that. Okay. And it's complaining that it doesn't know what Servlet API is. At the bottom here, I'm going to add a section called properties, like that. And so now it knows what that is. So the next thing I'm going to copy here is going to be the Jersey REST API. This is the API that we're going to use to run our backend REST, Java REST API. So we just need that Jersey bundle, Jersey server, Jersey core, and Jersey JSON. So that's that. And then for our database, I'm going to copy two dependencies, two Maven dependencies, and these are going to be MongoDB Java driver, just a regular Java driver, and Django. I'm going to use Django. Basically, it's an ORM management tool that will help us build the data access objects much faster, and I'll show you how to do that. Then I'm gonna copy faster XML. This is for actually translating objects from JavaScript at the front end to Java in the back end, and then transporting them, converting them from the database into Java, and then into JSON, and bringing them to the front end. And you'll see how that works. It works seamlessly. So next, this is for the web tokens. We're gonna be generating web tokens in the back end to secure the web application, and then passing them to Angular for security. I've already shown you how to do that in tutorial number 3. So next, this allows connection to other ports. Angular uses 4200. Jetty uses 8080. So this thing manages that. So when we are jumping from the front end and it's Angular 4200 and you want to go to the back end, the application is secured. You may have some security issues. So this, I'm going to show you how to do this, plus another plugin, Chrome plugin, to get to the back end without being blocked for CORS, which is CORS. You can read about that one. It's a form of security for the web. Next, this is just for extracting, credentials from, when we pass the credentials, they'll be in a JSON file. We can use this Google simple Google code to translate or to extract the username password from the credentials. And last but not least, I'm going to use this here. This is a common Apache command line, which is very important. And that's all for the dependencies. Now in the build, I'm going to add two things. I'm going to add plugins, and I'm going to add two plugins, and I'll explain to you what those are. So the first plugin here is just for Java JDK, so that we make sure that we're using JDK 1.8 because we specified it down somewhere here. And the second one is just for the server, which is a Jetty server. So in order to have a Jetty server, it's very convenient. You build the server and you destroy it at the end of the application, so you don't have to install anything. So instead of doing that, we have this plugin that actually generates and builds a server on the fly for us to deploy the application, which makes it much simpler. And I'll show you how that happens now. Last but not least, on this file, I'm gonna this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna add profiles, and if you can read about Maven profiles, and basically what these does is that when you do a build, you can build it for a different profile. So we're going to be building it for dev, and sometimes we'll be building it using enunciate in order to create the Swagger UI. Sometimes we'll build it as a Java file in order to populate the database, and I'll show you how to do that. So basically these are two profiles, and when we call the profiles, we'll do Maven, and then we'll do something like enunciate, and it will now build using this profile. We'll do Maven shade, and then now we'll build it with using this, and I'll show you how to do that. So that's all for this file. Okay, so as you can see, as you build, Maven looks at all these dependencies and actually brings up all your Java files inside there. So that's done. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to modify the root folder files. Okay, so we brought in several files in here, so make sure that's running. So if you look inside here, there's the build file in here. So you look at it, it just says clean package and skip, so that's great. I'm going to delete everything else there. I'm going to modify also. Enunciate is this one here. So this is an XML file. So it's just basically says that pick up all the REST files under pmk app. If you remember, we created the application with this. So now I can do this and just show you a little bigger here. So we're just saying pick up any file from there and include in the pattern. So when we build the Swagger UI to test in the front end on the browser, you have all the files from there. So that's what you do. So this is user REST API, so we don't have to change anything else there. Okay, next we're gonna so the POM is done. We modified, we copied the dependencies. Now we're gonna build and run the application. Okay, so let's go here now to the CLI, back to the CLI, and our CLI is over here. So I'm gonna do, now that we've done that, we'll do a build again. So if you remember, because of that script, you can just do build, and I type in BUI and I do tab, and it just gives me, that's the only command there that's like that. So I'll just run it like that. As you can see, it's works really great. So it's building the application. The application is built. Now if you go back, you can see if you do in the file explorer and you look at it, you'll see that now all of a sudden our this is a workspace, our volume 3 user has a target. This has just been created, and that's how to do a build. To run it, the file is this, and so it just says jetty run, and that's all you have to do to create the server and run your application in it. Run. Now do tab again, it's a batch file. That's so watch what happens. It's just gonna go down, create that thing. So it's building the server on the fly, and then it just deploys the stuff, and there it is, and it's done. So the server started in 10 seconds. So let's see what is going on in the Chrome browser. I'm gonna I always do this. I do more tools, clear browsing data, to make sure that I don't have any browsing cached data, because we're using, we're putting objects into the web browser, and sometimes they get cached. So I'm gonna do just this. I'm gonna do Jetty localhost 8080, and that's where Jetty is running. As you can see now, it says hello world. One other thing that I do is F12, or you can just, in Chrome, you can just do the menu, more tools, developer tools. It's F12, and as you can see, the application is running. Right now it says it failed to load with 404, so that it's good. So now that we have that, let's go to the back and try to build that application. So, and deploy it inside the end. So the first thing you want to do is you want to stop the server, because I have a script built in the back end which allows you to kind of we're going to go to Visual Studio Code to open an application again in the project in Visual Studio Code, our front end Angular IDE. All you do is to do open folder, kind of like that, and boom, and there it is. And so I'm going to go to volume 3, and I'm going to go select that folder. It opens up my application, and now to build it, I have copied just 2 files. Okay, so one of them is called build script. In this build script, I'm going to do a build for production, and all it's doing is that put it in that application that we built. I want you to look at this into the web app and put that in there. And what does that mean? Let me show you what that means. What it means is that in our file explorer, when we look at our application in here, this is our Java application in here, source main in the web app. We're gonna have the files just put in here. I'm gonna do CLS to clear, and I'm gonna do build. So this is gonna build the Angular front end application and put it into the back end, into our Java application. So in here you will see that the files will be put in here. I could actually go there and delete index.jsp right now, because we're not going to need that anymore. It's going to build and then bring that in. So let's look at it building. So this may take a while sometimes, because it has to do a lot of things. And again, I would advise you to do the build for production, which takes a much longer time to do, but it makes sure that it also checks to make sure that all your files are there, and also when you're running it as in production mode, the Angular application runs much faster. I'm going to go to the File Explorer and show you a few things, and we'll get back this, and then we'll see how it is. So inside source main, I'm going to create a folder called Java, which is where Java. Inside Java, I'm going to create compmk. So it's from PMK app. Inside here, inside app, I'm going to create several folders. I'm going to create a file called DAO, which is where our data access objects are going to go. Bin, we're going to put some scripts there, and I'm going to copy just the scripts and show you how that happens. And folder called DB. These are all folders for our Java code, so we can organize them in packages in more understandable way, so that when you're developing with other users, other developers, it's good to have your code organized properly, so you can find your files. We're going to have a filter. Filter classes are going to go there, so that when calls are coming from the front end going to the back end, we filter them, and if they need to access the database, then we verify that the user is logged in. That's what the filter is for. Next, model. This is where our user class and all the other model classes are going to be. REST. This is where our REST services are going to be residing, that folder. we're gonna at first just have login and user REST services, and then we have another one called service. So our REST services use files from communication to the back end and front end and all that stuff. So we don't put a lot of logic in the REST services. We just leave it like the implementation classes. I mean files and methods, and then we put our service, our business logic inside the service folder. So we put Java classes inside there to do our business logic. Finally, we have a util. So this is where we're going to put our password utilities and our application utilities and all that stuff, and I'll show you how that works. So let's go back now to see what happened with our Visual Studio. So our Visual Studio, you can see what happened is that it built all those files. As you can see, it built the application and it deployed inside this volume 3 user. So now if we go inside our file explorer, you'll see that inside the web app we have the files inside there, and so we're ready to run our applications, as you can see. So let's go back now to our command line. I'm in command line, so I just did the build again, and as you can see, it's building my application. It kind of changes the color. I don't like that, but this is Windows 10. So it's been built. What we're going to do now is to do run again. Okay, so there it comes up. Now let's go to the browser and see what happens. So I'm going to refresh this browser again. So again, I usually close this and I do Chrome clear data to clear the cache. And then I'm going to go bring up that app again. So it comes up here, and now you can see our applications in there. In the Chrome browser, what I'm going to do is to do F12 to see what errors are there. So the application we built in step 2 of our application of volume 2 is in here, and we have everything. So now the only thing is that if you try to log in here, it won't work because we are hitting the database. And let's look at it. So we know that the hint over here says user 1, and if you don't enter an email and you try to do something, you see it's got already validation saying username must be that. Just make this a little bigger so you can see. So it'll say username must be a valid email address. So this has to be user1@gmail.com. So now it accepts that. Password is required. The password is just password, as we can see over here. So if I try to log in now, what happens? Let's see. Log in. See, it says localhost 8080 login not found. This is because we don't have these REST services in there. So let's go ahead and build the REST services that involves the backend. We're going to go to our IntelliJ now and make sure that everything in the project is looking good. So the project, source main Java, great. Okay, you go down here and you say mark as directory as sources root. So now, since we created those in the Explorer, the IDE doesn't know, but now it knows that classes created here are going to be Java classes, so now we could start creating Java classes. So that's a little trick you should know. So the first thing we're going to build is data access object class. This is going to be, when we do MongoDB, we need basically some string, a very long string IDs. So it generates the IDs itself. So in order to do that, I have this class here, and look what I'm going to call it. I'm going to be under model, and I'm going to say new Java class. So I'm going to call it DA or bean. Here's the code. It's going to look like that. You can click Alt Enter and enter to import the date. This object is going to be coming from types. That is based on our POM dependencies. So that's all for this class. So all it does is that it picks up an object from the front end, and or when you're creating a new user, it's just gonna create a new object ID. And I'll show you. It's a very long string. You'll see how it works. It's a very long string. So we're gonna create another model class. We're gonna call it user. We'll just have to say that. And so what this user class is, first you do Alt Enter. Yeah, I want the Java util. So that's the user class. It extends again the DAO bean class which you just created, so that we can get to use the methods like getID and setID, which are those IDs in the Mongo database, and you'll see how useful that is. Next thing I'm going to create is a utility. So I'm going to go here to util here. Again, it's a Java class. Just going to do that. So here's the code. So all it's doing is, okay, first it has a properties file, and we're going to import this from, Java util properties. It has an input stream, and I'll show you what this input stream is for. These are all Java util, okay, Java util date, simple format date. This is for parsing dates and all that stuff. This utility here will pull resources from this folder here, and we're going to put that in the next step, and I'll show you how that works. So tree set is a map, is Java util. User is a class we just created. List is that. Then local date, I'm gonna get it from Java time. Local date time. And now let's continue with the other steps. So I'll not be able to compile this class right now, but you'll see I'm gonna bring in a lot of stuff that's gonna fix all these errors. In the resources, I'm gonna say new file config.properties, and in this file I'm gonna put in a MongoDB username. We're gonna call it user tutorial, a password salt. When we pass passwords to the backend, we're gonna encrypt them, and then we're gonna add a salt onto it, so that hackers may not be able to crack. So when we pass it to the backend, in case they intercept it and get our username and password, they won't even know what it is, because it will be encrypted. A salt will be added to it and encrypted. So that's the salt. And then 10 is like, you can change this when a token is generated. It's very complicated, and you can specify how long that token lasts. So after 10 minutes, if somebody is trying to hack it, after 10 minutes, it's actually not even useful anymore. So application only accepts tokens that are less than 10 minutes. It's just those three properties that we did. But if you look up here, that's why I said string get property. So it goes to that config properties file that we just created under here, and it gets those properties, and then so you can give it whatever the database name is, all that. So that's a good way to code, so you don't have to hard code. So when you change the database name, or if you want to change from 10 minutes to 20 minutes, that's where you come in. Next, what we need to do is to create a password utility. So for this one, you just go here to util. Here's the code for the password utility, and this is the thing that is encrypted. So I'm gonna do Alt Enter and Alt Enter. So that's a message digest. So what this thing does is that it'll just generate a password. So it'll pick up the password when you give it a password over here, and then it'll use the utilities password salt. If you recall from that password salt, so it'll add a salt to it, and then it'll just encrypt it and save it in the database. That way when you withdraw it from there, so if somebody ever hacked your database, they'll see the passwords, but there's nothing they can do with them because they don't know what they are. And by the way, this hash is one way, so when you encrypt it, there's no way to get it back. All you can do is, if you give me a password, I know what the salt is, I'll add it to that and pass it to the database, and if it's the same as what was done when it was created or when you first registered, then it'll verify that. So it's a very safe system. I'm going to come back here, Java class, we're going to call token. I'm going to copy it and paste it and explain it to you again. Again, what we're doing here is, okay, first let's fix the dependencies. So unsupported, JWTs claims. So keys, and let me import these and then I'll explain to you what they are. So I'm using basically free software, so you can do this. It won't cost you anything. So the first thing it's doing, we look at it over here, it's gonna first, this is for issuing a token, so it'll pick up whatever username is and URI, and it'll create a token and issue it to the front end. And you'll see that token, it's using SH256, so it's 256-bit encrypted long string, and you'll see it. We call it the authentication token in the front end. And you know, we've already seen this, but I'll show you where it is once we get to the front end. Okay. We have a validate, simple validate method. So if you give me a string as a token, this token that was generated here, I can verify whether it's valid. What do I mean by valid? If you specify 10 minutes, I can specify whether it was generated less than 10 minutes ago and whether it contains a username and password that is in the database. So that's what that validation is. And then there's also verification, you know. Again, if you give me a JWT token and you give me your username, I can find out if your username is associated with that token. That's what verify is. And this is the one that encrypts it using a secret. So it's using basically the salt and from the that we generated in our configuration properties. So, and then for refreshing tokens, this is like kind of for the future. We'll be able to actually refresh it. So basically we'll be able to look at it, and if your username is still correct and the user is still logged in and you have 5 minutes left and you're not being inactive, then we'll refresh it. But we're not going to use this method for now. The next thing in our coding we're going to do is now the repository. The repository is basically an interface. It's a data access object. So I'm going to do new Java class, and this is how you, so we're going to call it repository, but it's an interface, it's not a Java class, so we do that. Again, I'm going to copy and paste. You can check out the code and do it yourself. So I'm going to go here and do this. So I'm just saying T and list is alt enter is just a Java list. So that's, this interface is going to be used by all the Java classes that we're going to be using as models to connect to the database. So we have the repository over here, so we can kind of resolve that now. What else? So I use a repo. So we're going to create that now. So I'm going to come again to the data access object, create a Java class now called IUserRepo. And then I'm going to say this implements repository with a user, this kind of user. So once I do that, it will tell me, I'll click on this and I'll say implement the methods. So if you recall that repository, there's these 4 methods. So you basically, for each class to connect to the database, you need to do that. So that should fix all the errors in here. One more error, find by username. We need this method. So we're going to go to the user repository, and I'm going to put those 2 methods there. And then I'm going to do this. I'm going to do alt. So basically, we're going to be creating this class using a collection. So every time you create this, you need to provide a collection. So it needs to come in there. So that's good. As for the find, when you're looking for just one, we're going to implement it like this. And with OID, let me show you. This is a Django, Java Django. Remember, we are going to be using Java Django. So that's all. We find one. So you give me a string ID. I'm going to convert it into like a, you know, Bison code and then pass it to the backend and find just one of those. To update, we're going to just save the object. And then to delete, alt enter. We're going to use object ID. So you pass me an ID, we can delete. And that's it for now. So now if I come back in here, I should be able to resolve everything. So as you can see, this has been resolved. We're going to create the users on the fly. We're going to generate them. And so I'm going to create a Java class here. and I'm going to call it UserDB. It's a good way to generate 3 users, put them in the database that we can use to test. So this is the user repo of Mongo collection, import password util, application util. We're gonna use Java util date. This is called MongoDB. This is Django. So this is this user is just our user that we generated. So this is just how to do it. So this little class here populates 3 users. One of them is called user1@gmail.com. If you recall our screen, that's how we use it, and the password is just password. Okay, and our password user3. So what we're doing is that when we create the user, we just take the password and encrypt it using the password util that we just had. We save it in the database. So this is how to get a handle of the database using Django. The collection is going to be called user, and it's going to be unique usernames in it. That's all that we're going to create a class here called MongoDB Utility. Again, it extends app utility, and all it does is that to call that user class that we just did, and then it just populates the database with 3 users with their passwords encrypted. We need another model class called credentials. That's how we're going to be passing the credentials from the front end to the back end. Actually, that's a model class, just basically like that. It's just a pojo with a username, password, and you can create it using both. Next, we're going to do just the service now. The user service there. This is very important. This is for the REST service. This is where our business logic is. Like we said, we're going to separate the business logic from our REST services, just so that we don't have, has a good way of coding. So this is our user service. It's just going to look like this. Alright, so it's going to have Alt Enter to get the user, array list, Java util list, token util. So over here, this is application utility. User repo, date, Java util date. So that's result. So what this class basically does is that we can get a list of users. This is the one we're going to use. Once you log in, you'll see we'll display these 3 users that are in the database that we'll have created. We'll display them. We get them that way. We get this token from the front end from Angular, and we kind of verify using that verification tool that I showed you in the password. We verify that you're logged in and your login is still valid. It's not after 10 minutes. And then if that's true, then we just return the users to you. Get user is for getting 1 user. Again, we verify your token to make sure you're still logged in, return your 1 user. Add user, same thing, verify your token, make sure you're legit, and then we find 1 user. If the user already exists, then we're just going to update or tell you, oops, something, an error. If it doesn't exist, then we're going to set a user ID as being the maximum from there. If you are, you'll see 1, 2, 3, and the numbers never repeat. And if you delete one of the numbers, then it'll just find the number that's it can use. And so every single user is unique in terms of this user ID. And the reason why we do this is because Mongo uses a very long string. We don't want to always be using that. It's very good for security, but if I want to see, I can say user number 20, and that will give me this. So that's why we do this little thing like that. Now, update user, same thing. Check if the user is over there, just update the information with whatever you give us from the front end. Use a JWT to make sure that it's, you're still logged in. Delete user, same thing. Such users, this is for, when we click on a field, it'll automatically be pinging the backend, checking. If you type in fill, PHI, it'll look for PHI in the database and do a search like that if you're logged in. So that's basically what that is. we're going to do the login service now while we are here. So login service, that's a new Java class. Okay. Again, I can show you what the login service is going to look like, and it's pretty simple. I'm going to do, okay, so first it's going to get something from the repository. So it's going to get the users from the repository. This is a user application. Credentials is that class that we just created. Okay, so we pick that. Token util is that token. Objects is a Java util objects. And let me import these and I'll show you. Oh, simple JSON parser. Simple parser, that's what it is. And then this is that thing again. First exception. This is simple parser. So what it's doing when you're logging in, all it's going to do is first of all provide the our connection to the database. In the constructor, it provides our connection. So you have to have a connection in order to use this class basically. And you get this from the REST services, and I'll show you how to do that. So the authenticate method is where it picks up your credential file from this file that we just created, picks up your user information and the URI information, encrypts that, and then issues a token, and then this is a login method. Our password util needs to be imported. That's our password util. It just gets whatever you give it something, it picks up this, and then it just encrypts your password and passes it to the database and sees if you exist. If you exist, then it returns true. Credentials, again, this is for extracting credentials from the front end because they come as JSON. So when you provide this, the username and password, it comes in as one string, and so we need to do this. So basically that's all what that is. Next, we're going to do our REST services. This is our login REST service, which is going to use our user service basically. First, I'm going to put in here that path is from JavaX WSRS. So this is Jetty basically. This is Jetty stuff. So we're going to come here and just do so. When you get to the REST services, you say login, it's going to call this class. So this is alt enter servlet context, post, consumes, produces, media type, all this JavaX Java specification for REST services basically. That's what it is. So we're done with this. So all it's going to do is got just one method called getLoginService. Okay, and then authenticate. This calls the authentication method, passes it your credentials as a file, as a string, and then now we extract username and password from that string in the service like I showed you, and pass it and then authenticate you. Another class we're going to create is the user REST. So now we are basically creating REST. We have everything ready for REST. And all this other work we did was actually just for this, because the REST service is all that matters to Angular. It just doesn't know anything else. This is all it relies to. It'll make a call to the backend and just get the data. Our user endpoint first is gonna have, you have to have this. I'm gonna do alt enter. So we're gonna be calling it using the path user, and again it's just like that. So context is from JavaX, servlet context, get comes from there. Okay, produces, all these are REST specification, Jersey REST specification, or Java REST specification, which we're going to be using Jersey to implement that. So let me just import everything and explain. So our first method, if you just come in and say whatever, or the URL for the REST service is user. If you do a get, it'll only get you all the users. So basically a user list, but it'll pass the authorization, which is your that big string that you give it to make sure that you're logged in. That string has your username, password, and we return the users to you if you're still logged in and you're a valid user. Again, we have another get that pass. So you come in here with a user / ID and you give me an ID. I can find one user with that ID that you pass me, as long as you have authorized. So as you can see, all these methods have authorization because we don't want somebody who's not authorized to get user information. And we want to, in the future, we're going to use roles to limit how much data you can get. But right now we're returning all the users because only, it's not at the advanced stage. So in future tutorial, that's what we're going to do. Add user, again, this uses the service, the business logic to add a user. If the user exists, then it will just return a message, as you saw in the back. Update user, same thing. And then you can delete a user using a user ID. Again, you have to be authenticated, and that's why we have authorization from your page header. And then search, again, when you're typing in a name, it'll be searching continuously for that. The next thing is the security. How do we lock the backend? In the filter, I'm going to create a class here, and I'm going to call it a JWT security filter. First, I'm going to say that we are implementing something called container filter request. So if I do that, you'll see that it complains, and then I'll click on this and I'll say implement the methods, and it has one method called filter. So that method, we're just going to implement it like this. And so we import everything. And again, this is stuff that we created or stuff that you can get for free on the internet. So that's what that is. So as you can see, so we just look for the authorization from the front end, and it starts with the word bearer, because that's always passed from the front end from Angular. And so we'll extract that bearer and then look for the other stuff. Make sure that it's coming from API, and I'll show you where this comes in. That's our Web XML is going to specify that. So if it's correct, we'll pass it through. If it's not correct, we'll return you back. If the user has a token, we're going to verify or validate that the token is still valid based on 10 minutes. If it's not valid, then we're not going to allow a call to the backend. So this is basically protecting our REST services. So anything coming over, especially the endpoint, not to the login, because to the login, when you log in, you don't have any token at that time. But anything going to the user, and in the future, any other classes we're going to have in here, all these things are protected using this utility. If something goes wrong, we will never even let you access these methods, so you'll never see the users in the database. So that's how security is implemented. Now let's do our web.xml. So if you look inside here, inside our application, this web app, webinf, our web.xml is over here. So the first thing we're doing is application context listener, and we need this application context listener. Let's go create it first, then I'll explain to you what that is. So application context listener is a Java class. Watch, I'm gonna come over to just the root over here, because that's what controls the entire application. So I put it here, and watch what I do in it. This is how now this is where everything happens. This is how Angular in the front end is linked to Java in the back end, and then Java links and also linked to the database, MongoDB. So this is where everything happens. So observe this. It's very simple, but it's very important. App context listener. We're gonna do that. Okay. So first, Mongo client for connection to the database. Alt enter MongoDB Django servlet from Java servlet. app util, the utility class we created, servlet context. Again, servlet context from Java servlet. So basically this thing uses Java servlet API to connect you to the back. So user repo, we created that. This is a Mongo collection. So remember, when we created the user repo class, we said that we're going to be passing it a collection. So that's all we're doing. We're create a user repo using a collection. What's the collection? The collection is user, and it has to have unique username, all that stuff. So when you first come in, this should be declared file name app context listener. Okay. Oh, geez. Okay, so I made a little mistake. When I copied this, I didn't copy this correctly. This should have said, so I'm gonna just do, this is how you do this. You just do refactor and you say rename file to that. Okay, so now everything is good. So basically, so when you start the application, so when Jetty comes in and your user application runs, it connects to the database and populates and then keeps an attribute called login service and user service to connect to the database. So, and these user services, in order for you to start the user service, you have to give them a database connection. And what is it doing here? It's creating a database connection, picking up a collection called user and supplying it over there. And that is just all to do. So as you can see, first we have a listener. So when the application starts in Java, if there's a listener, this listener is listening. This is the first thing that's going to happen. So we're going to connect to the database so that the application is ready and it's supplied with data. So all those services have the data, and so when you're making REST services now, the REST services will be able to connect to the database to the back end. So that's how it is now. So we're using Java. This is Jersey basically. Config properties says any file in the compmk app rest, which is like over here. All these are the files inside there. That's how you do it. Pojo mapping. This is like to convert Pojos to basically JSON. And then we're using the security filter, so that as a container request filter, we looked at the security filter. This is how we built it. We just said that if a call comes in, we just take the token from the call, validate it to make sure that we don't allow people to get into the REST services unless they're authenticated properly. And that's all that is. And then disable what I'll show you in the login. It logs a lot of stuff. Jersey logs a lot of stuff, and I don't want it logging, so you gotta do this if you don't want it to log or to disable the logs. So basically, as you can see, we're saying API. So any calls coming through, again, we say if it's API, let them pass through. So our web is configured to. So we're gonna do whatever application localhost 8080/API/ so user/user ID to call the database. Cross origin, I'll show you. This is like to allow get, post, and everything to the back end. And if you don't do this, because on the front end Angular uses usually default port 4200 and the back using 8080, your machine for security reasons is not going to allow you to get through, and I'll show you how to go through that problem. So basically that's what all that is. So that's it. That's all for building the back end using Java. So let's get out of here. And now I'm gonna copy, first of all, 2 files in the file explorer from bin. I'm just gonna copy all these files into volume 3 user. I'm gonna create a folder here called bin, and then I'm gonna paste those files in there, and I'll explain to you what they do. Okay, so if you look at them, they're basically like just to create. This one calls the enunciate. If you remember, we had some profiles. This is just for calling different profiles, and this is a shell script for Unix. These are batch files, just 3 batch files. And let me show you how to use the batch files right now. In here, I'm gonna do bin slash build. I'm gonna do build enunciate. Now first I'm gonna do build shade, and let me show you what that does. So the first thing before you do that, you need to come in here in IntelliJ in our POM file, and this is going to be very useful. This is how you do these things. Watch in the POM here. I'm just going to change the I'm going to make sure it's a jar file, okay, and I'm going to do build shade. So I'm running the command build, and so what this is doing is just basically building the application using profile called Maven Shade so that I can populate the database using this class. So I come back in here and that's been built. I'm going to populate the database now. And to populate the database, I'm going to do this, run MongoDB Utility. You need to have a Mongo database running, and so to have it running, all you do is I'm just going to do cd /that MongoDB. You start the database like that. So this tool, and that's what I'm going to recommend, but I'll show you this tool in the next tutorial. And you can use any tool to check the Mongo database. You could even use command line. You make sure the database is running, and then I'm going to come back in here. So I'll just go in there to show you how that works. So we'll come back in here, cd, and now I know the database is running. I'm going to do run MongoDB, and watch. It just takes that file that we just created using shade and populates 3 users. So the first user is like user 1. This is using the Java class, and that's how easy it is to populate data into the database. So now the database is running. One of the things we can do to test is we're gonna run, again, we're gonna do build, and we're gonna run enunciate. Enunciate like that. But first, before you do that, you need to come in IntelliJ over here, and you need to change this to a WAR file. That's the only time. For enunciate, you need a WAR file, and watch what it does. So I'm going to change that to that, and then I'm going to go back in here to CLI, and I'm going to do build for enunciate, and watch what happens. We do a clean package again. And it's going to assemble the project, and look what it's doing. First of all, if you look inside here, our file explorer, you look inside our user source main web app, you're going to see nothing here. It's going to create a file, a folder here, and put in something called basically this is a way to test the database in the back end, and it's a very useful way to do it. Before you even connect your Angular front end, you need to make sure that that's working. So as you can see, it's creating JAX-XB, and it's generated. So it looks at the folder REST folder in here, and everything inside here, inside this folder REST. Right now we have only 2 classes. It generates these. So let's go back now to our CLI, our file explorer, and as you can see, a REST API has been created there. So it created this folder, and now let me show you how to use that folder. Okay, so to use it, first, before we forget, let's go back there and change this back to a Java file. We'll change it back to a Java file. I always like it leaving it as a jar, but when you're using this enunciate this profile, you need to make a jar file because it relies on a jar file so that it can get the class from the jar file. That's the only time you have to do that. Otherwise, just keep it as a jar. And so now we come over here. This is done. So let's run this application. So to run it again, we're gonna do build, just a regular build, and then we're gonna run the application. So that's how to run the application. And now, once we run it, we run successfully. Yeah, see, now it's running. And you're going to see over here, it's going to show you that it's just initiated to, see, it's connecting to the database. You can see app context listener right there, successful, connected to the database. And there's two root classes, if you notice, user endpoint and login endpoint. So it recognized that we have two REST services. So that's just how to build that. The application is completely built. So now let's test it from the front end. Now to test it, because we did that other function that I showed you, we can come in here and I always like to clear the browsing data. And now I'm going to go to a blank screen and I'm going to do Swagger UI and watch what happens. See, this is REST UI. So now this is a very useful tool for testing the backend. It'll show you that the backend is working. So the first thing that our Angular application is going to do is to do a login. So let's do a login. Okay. So we're going to do a post. And what are we going to post? You need so Angular at the front end is just basically going to be generating a string that looks like this. And it's got a username and a password, user1 and that. So if you have the correct one, you click on here, try it out like that, and it connects to the back end. As you can see, we got it. So we got a user. So basically, we got this thing. This is a token that we're looking for. See this long thing right here? Without that, and it's only valid for 10 minutes. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to go back now, and instead of login, I'm going to go to the user endpoint, and I'm going to say, no, I'm not going to say get user. I'm going to get all the users. Yeah, so get user. You provided with this authorization right here. Okay, so you provided with that thing that you just got, that long thing, and give it a try and watch. Goes to the database and tells you there's 3 users. See, user 3, user 2. So this is a very useful tool for doing that, and we created using that enunciate that I showed you. So that's just basically how to do that. So also just to show you that. So now we need to test the front end with the front end that we built. Okay, and here is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna do port 8080 is where it goes. So now it's over here. Let me do F12. Chrome Developer Tools, right? And I'm gonna do now user1@gmail.com. I'm gonna enter a wrong password, and I'm gonna put a 1 at the end. And let's see what happens. See, it's telling you that login failed for username password 1. So let's remove the last character. And let's do a login. And ladies and gentlemen, that's how to do it. So now you can see we have 3 users. Each user has an ID, and this is a long thing like that, as you can see. So each ID is unique, so it was created. So this data basically is from the back end. If you look in here, local storage, access token is our access token. You can see it's a very long thing. So that's what was created. So this is different from what we just got from the other place. If you try to pass the same thing, as you can see, this one ends with AF0. The current one ends with B7JK. So they're very different. So this is valid for 10 minutes. We can still use the other one, but so that's basically how that works. And how did this work? So to conclude the tutorial, let me just show you how this is working. So all I had to do is I made a few modifications, and this code is in GitHub, so you can get it. But basically what it's doing is this is our application from tutorial 2, but I changed a few things. The first thing I did in the login, in the sign-in component, you see I changed this a little bit. This is what we were using before. We were hard coding this thing. So now I changed it so that it's like this. We're just basically saying take the username and password and take the authentication service, okay, and pass it in something that has that user, basically. So if you pass it in, it'll look like this. So that method will give you basically this thing right here, as you can see. So when you log in, it username, password, login successfully. So if we come back in here, that's all I had to do. So I changed the login method from tutorial 2. I just changed that, and then in here I came in here and I said several things. The first thing I said was, okay, first my table data source, okay, and I added these things right here. As you can see, I added math badge, table, and paginator. Those are Angular material components. This from our tutorial 2, we already had that. So I got input, form field, and all that stuff. So if you look at it, so I added list user. I add the math table, passed it. So this is a table that displays users' first name, middle name, last name, all those things. And so it connects. When we are logging in, we're basically connecting to the back end, okay, pulling users from our user service. And where's our user service? So services, user service, get users, that method. So it gets a list of users, displays those list of users over here, so puts them into a table, and then just displays them. So basically that's what we did. So as you can see, again, in our browser, we have the 3 users, and that there right now you have that. But let me just show you one last thing before we leave. So like I said, if I say local storage access token, it has an access token. If I click on the logout button and to click this, you clear the log, or the console. And if I say again local storage access token, you can see it's undefined. So if I try now to go back to that page I was in user, it won't let me do that because I'm not logged in. As you can see up here, it's just saying return your list user, but you need to log in first before you can do that because you're not authenticated. So again, if I do user1 at Gmail, correct, user, first of all, this button is now enabled. Login, again, you can see the users. Why? Because if I do local storage access token again, now we have an access token. So that is it for today's tutorial. Thank you very much for watching this tutorial. As usual, please follow us in YouTube and look below, and you'll see links to our source code, and also give us any kudos or any questions you have. Please don't hesitate to write and I'll answer to your questions. Thank you very much for watching this tutorial. Goodbye.